Ladies, gentlemen, and hurrah of all ages, I think that for the most part, everyone who has been giving a chance to Season 2 for Diablo 4 has been having a pretty good time with it. Even those who decided that they've been done with the season already seem to have enjoyed the time they spent with it before stopping, and are very open to returning in future seasons, because overall, I think we can all agree that the developers actually did a pretty good job making Season 2. The changes to the game as a whole are solid, the reworks to damage calculation, resistance is finally working and mattering, stash searching and filtering is nice, even though it'd be nice just to have more stash base in general, the new endgame bosses, and that isn't even mentioning the season-specific mechanics like Blood Harvest, which is an actual joy for open-world content to take part in. And that sort of brought up a new glaring issue, because for all the things that Season 2 has done quite well, and I have praised it quite a bit up to this point, there is one big thing that has become a really big problem in comparison to how smooth the rest of the experience feels, at least in the endgame, and that issue is Helltide. And it needs fixing before Season 3, because right now it is quite clear that there is an issue when you do a Blood Harvest and then immediately jump to Helltide, and it just feels so much worse. But imagine once Blood Harvest is gone, and we only have Helltide left, it won't feel good to do if it is the way it is right now, and there's quite a bit going on that needs to be fixed or changed in some way to bring this up to snuff with the rest of the stuff, and have it actually feel good to take part in, especially now, more than ever, as changes made with patch 1.2 really just made Helltide even more important. Before this, if you wanted to enchant items, the main bottleneck was gold. You'd run out of gold before anything else, but now that enchanting costs have been lowered significantly and gold gain has been increased a massive amount, this is no longer the case, and so the new bottleneck for enchanting is Forgotten Souls, which have a chance of dropping when you salvage a legendary item, but the main place that you can acquire these is simply from doing Helltide. They drop from various nodes during Helltide, they drop from the elites during Helltide, and you can get some when you open any of the various Helltide chests. So now that this is the enchanting bottleneck, it incentivizes a lot more Helltide play from players, which makes the issues a lot more blatant when you're forced to do the mechanic more often. Not only that, of course, because this season we have the new endgame bosses, with the most important one being Duriel, the real big one, who even has a decent drop rate on uber unique items, and to summon Duriel you need to kill Grigoire, and to summon Grigoire you need to open 2 chests of living steel in Helltide, unless you roll particularly high on GG and just happen to get a double value chest, in which case you only need to open 1. Each of those chests though is 300 cinder cost, and only 2 of them spawn in a Helltide at any given time, with respawns on the hour mark if that happens to line up within your Helltide timer. So at absolute most, you can get 4 of these chests per Helltide, which translates to 2 spawns of Grigoire if you get 4, which most often translates to 1 spawn of Duriel. So anyone who wants to do Duriel has to do pretty much every Helltide that they can, because it takes a lot of Helltide to farm him on repeat. Simple as that. Both of those things combined means that once you get to the proper endgame this season, more than any other part of the game's lifetime up to this point, Helltide has a lot of relevance, and it's brought to light its larger problems. First, let's talk about what the issues are, and then we'll talk about how I think they could fix each one. Starting off then, let's talk unintended issues, the bugs, because right now there are 2 massive bugs plaguing Helltide and making it feel even worse than it would otherwise. The first is a cinder drop rate bug, where sometimes you will just have cinders drop at about 20% of their normal rate. The only known fix to this is to log out and back in until it just happens to be working normally, but sometimes it just doesn't actually do anything, and if you get plagued by this bug, you can spend an entire Helltide getting like 300 cinders and feeling absolutely robbed for your time. This is even worse if you don't know about this bug and you just think that this is normal for whatever reason, that they've just lowered the drop rate or something, and you think that this is just the way that it is, and it'll make people just not want to do Helltide. This is a clear, massive issue, and it obviously is a bug that needs fixing, so I'd absolutely expect this to be fixed by next season at the latest, but if it isn't, then this one will continue to be a problem. The other large bug issue has to do with the chests of living steel that I mentioned earlier that contain the boss spawning materials. While the game itself would never be so kind to us, there are websites where players communicate during a Helltide and say, hey, there is a mystery chest here and there is a living steel chest here, because they aren't shown on the map in game, but the reason that this works is because the chests are in the same place for every player, except that there are tons of instances where living steel chests, specifically the ones required to work your way up to Duriel, sometimes just do not spawn. Sometimes logging out and back in helps, it'll make it appear where it wasn't before, sometimes teleporting to another region and then back will help and it'll fix it, and sometimes it doesn't fix it. Sometimes nothing fixes it, and that chest will just refuse to spawn for you, and when that happens, you straight up just lose a ton of time if your goal is to farm Duriel, because now you're sitting there with 300 cinders and nothing to show for it because you have nothing to spend it on. It feels bad, and clearly something needs to be fixed so that the chests just work consistently the way that the mystery chests do, because when you get to open 1 living steel chest in a whole hour of Helltide, it feels like there was no point even being there. With the bugs out of the way then, let's talk about the legitimate issues on a more conceptual design level that I think need changing. First and foremost, at the top of the heap is the inactivity period. Helltide is active for a 1-hour period, then there is a 75-minute period of downtime, then a new Helltide will start. That is a never-ending cycle within the game, but why is this the case? Why do we need the downtime? Why does the downtime need to be longer than the uptime, even if we need downtime. And the biggest thing that makes me sad about this is, well, Blood Harvest. Blood Harvest shows very simply that letting the timer run out and then just moving the area immediately works great. It keeps the freshness of the event moving around so that you aren't stuck in one place for too long, but it removes the agonizing feeling of knowing the only things you want to do require Helltide farming during a time period where Helltide simply isn't up to be farmed. So first and foremost, do away with the downtime. There should always be a Helltide up somewhere on the map. It works for Blood Harvest, and it would work just as well for Helltide. The only exception is obviously with Helltide, your cinders reset when the zone moves, as opposed to Blood Harvest where you keep your materials. This in itself would solve a really annoying part of Helltide, but then there is even more than that too, because efficiency aside, Helltide just doesn't feel as good as Blood Harvest does. Part of the reason for that is twofold. One, the mob density. Helltide's density has gotten better, but Blood Harvest feels far more dense, which makes it feel good to just run around killing things. Two, the events and interactables. The chest full of free goodies in Blood Harvest are awesome, and the closest equivalent in Helltide are the screaming hell veins full of crafting materials. I think if these were a bit more plentiful, this would make it feel a far bit more rewarding, as it always is just a nice moment when you find one, but the frequency could be a lot better and make it more of an equivalent to the Blood Harvest coffins. Then we have the events, and I don't mean like the actual orange circle events, I mean summoning 150 cost altar scenarios, which is not only fun in Blood Harvest, but also ridiculously rewarding for the time you spend doing it. Helltide unfortunately just sort of lacks that feeling, but there are some ways to change it. The easy one is to just make the chest better in Helltide. This season we have a season blessing that gives you a chance at a bonus item from Helltide chests that are guaranteed to be a legendary or better, and I feel like that should just be the baseline on Helltide chests to start with. Make them feel genuinely rewarding to open up compared to the time expended in other endgame activities, especially when it comes to the living steel chests. I feel like for 300 cost, there should just be coming with 6 guaranteed living steel so that you can get 1 grigoire summon per chest opened in World Tier 4. That, or do something like the Blood Harvest main event if you want to lock it behind strength. Give an alternate to the living steel chest. It's just an altar that spawns in wave after wave of enemies for a cost of 300 cinders. It'll have elites, all of them scaled to Helltide levels, maybe even have the Hellfire rain down from above while active, maybe even spawning one of the Helltide bosses that already exists. Make a big thing of it and have it be actually hard and challenging so that somebody that just entered Torment difficulty probably can't do it, but someone with a proper build can quite easily, so that you can scale the reward with the challenge. And then have the end result of that altar event battling be 6 or more of living steel. That way you can avoid having people getting too many boss attempts when they are under geared, and make it easier for the people who are so strong that they can solo Duriel to actually be able to farm him at a reasonable pace. I think that is probably the best solution personally, but that also is a lot more time investment for the developers to create than just upping the number of steel you get from the chest. So I don't know, I just think one of those things needs to happen. Then the one last thing, and this is one that I think is more of an opinion than a fact, is how to make it better, and that's just that I think that cinders shouldn't disappear between different Helltide zones. Right now, if you want to farm Helltide, you farm the exact amount of cinders you need, then you bounce because there's no other reason to stick around in the Helltide. You've already got what you want, and it won't help you later. If you made cinders stick in between these events, it would just make a much more enjoyable gameplay loop in my mind. So I'm like, oh, Helltide just started. I guess I'll go farm that for an hour, collect up all the cinders that I can, and in a good build, you can get around 1500 cinders an hour without much hassle, so you open the living steel chests that are there, and the next time that you see a Helltide up, you can just go casually open the chest with the cinders that you already have. That would just feel so much more enjoyable to me than, oh, Helltide's up, time to go spend 20 to 30 minutes killing stuff and hoping the chests actually spawn in, and then I gotta leave early because there will be nothing else worth my time. It is worth noting here as well that there is apparently a bug going on right now. Yeah, I know, another Helltide bug, where if you log out during a Helltide and then log in the next time when another Helltide is active, you'll actually have the cinders that you had left in the previous one. But that is far from a solution to this, just an interesting interaction that's going on in the game currently. But either way, the concept of cinders being kept is less of a need for me than more of a thing that would just be a nice change. I would mostly be happy enough if they just remove the whole downtime part of it and have it cycle location immediately when it ends. It would just feel a lot better, honestly. I do see a lot of people also talking about the whole losing half of your cinders on death, but I sort of like that personally. It provides a little risk-reward system if you are tackling the system earlier than intended, but also doesn't really affect you at all once you are properly geared. You've got your resistances and everything, which is a nice difficulty scaling mechanic for the system. But hey, honestly, there are 100 different ways you could change Helltide, and it would make different people happy for different reasons. Right now, compared to the other ending activities though, it just feels like you aren't being well rewarded, even though it is something that you are pretty much forced to interact with for proper endgame progression. As a result, it really shines through as a weak point of the game right now as far as the enjoyment goes in the endgame, so I hope that they are looking into changing it, and I hope that they reach the same conclusions as a lot of us have, which is that it does need some sort of changing. Whether they agree with my proposed changes or not, it doesn't matter. It's just that they need to do some changing in some way, shape, or form. All we can do right now really is hope that they're listening, and of course, you should let me know your own thoughts down below too. We might be able to come up with some even more interesting ways for them to fix the event. Like if you liked the video, subscribe with the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.